Welcome. This is my channel, and I tell stories of the mysterious, twisted, and paranormal. So please stick around and consider subscribing and turning on your post notifications. Now, I got a story for you today that will entertain you. So relax and enjoy, and remember, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind, or in this case, minds, of another world that's not our own. So let's go. And also just remember, I will be doing a giveaway that is unknown yet. Please, if you are watching this right now, all you have to do is subscribe to this channel and give it a thumbs up and you're in. Now, let's get on to the story. Andreas Gruber stood on the porch of his whitewashed dwelling and looked out across the misty field towards the dense tree line, which was about 100 yards away. It was mid-October in 1921, and an early coating of snow had settled over the Gruber farm, which was situated in the village of HINTERKAIFECK, which is about 60 miles north of Munich, Germany. And what held Gruber's attention were the footprints, because someone had walked out of that forest during the night and surveyed the house and the outbuildings in the dark and then just disappeared. And it was that last detail that absolutely perplexed Gruber most. The person had quite literally just disappeared. There were footprints running from the forest into the yard, but there were no footprints heading back towards the forest. And at this point, an involuntary shudder ran through Gruber, only partially due to the cold. And this was just the latest in a series of perplexing events at this farm. Just that morning, his long-term housemaid quit, saying that she refused to stay any longer in a home that was plagued by ghosts and poltergeists. And Gruber couldn't say that he blamed her. Like most rural folk, he was a pragmatist, and the events that he saw the last few weeks, however, had him quite on edge. First, there were missing keys, and then a folded newspaper that had appeared mysteriously on his porch, and then on another occasion he could have sworn that he smelled cigar smoke even though he himself only smoked a pipe. And then there had been the disembodied footsteps coming from the attic in the dead of night. Now, Gruber had at first written off those as the house being old, but then one night his wife had woken him in a state of panic, saying someone's in the attic, as she whispered through her clenched teeth. And then Gruber stopped for a second and listened. And then he heard it. And it was a distinctive clump of heavy, deliberate footsteps. His wife said, "Do something," as she was afraid and currently in the darkness of her home, and Gruber had reluctantly swung his feet out of bed and onto the cold floor when he retrieved his shotgun from the corner and headed for the bedroom door. Now, the passage of the hallway was dark and silent, and even the ghostly footsteps had ceased. Gruber didn't want to go up there, but he knew he had to, and this was a mystery that demanded a resolution. So the ladder stood at the end of the passage, illuminated by a slim moonlight from above. So he stepped forward and began pulling himself upward. Moments later, his head was through the hatch, and he scanned left to right in a jerky, quick movement. And the attic was well illuminated by the moonlight spilling through an undressed window, and he pronounced, "Who's there?" with a crackling in his voice, and the only response was the creaking of the old timbers around. Now, Gruber might well have written the whole incident off as the fanciful thinking that sometimes plagues one in the middle of the night. But upon investigation, the following morning, he found a single boot print in the dust, which he quickly smudged it out and said to his wife that nothing was there. He said there was no point in concerning the old woman unduly. Gruber was now convinced more than ever that the poltergeist hauntings in his home was actually somebody of flesh and blood, And the next time that intruder came clomping around in the middle of the night, he was going to give him a face full of buckshot. Now, Gruber was not a popular man in the village. In fact, other villagers went out of their way to avoid him and his family. And that preference was made easy by the isolation of his farm. Gruber, you see, was a wife beater, regularly applying his fist to his 73-year-old spouse, Kazelia. But not only that, he was also guilty of incest. His widowed daughter, Victoria, also lived at that farm together with her children, Kazelia Jr., who was just 7, and Joseph, who was 2. And rumor had it that Gruber had sired his own grandson, because the boy's father was most certainly not Victoria's husband, because he had died in the Great War several years earlier. So doing the math, it seems that Gruber was most likely the father and grandfather of the boy. And because of this, the Gruber family was all but ostracized in their home village. And when Gruber began telling stories in the local tavern about late night disturbances on his farm, nobody paid him much attention at all. Then when he began putting the word out that he was looking to employ a new maid, there were no takers, and it would be a full 6 months before he managed to fill that position. And the new maid was Maria Baumgartner, who took up her post on March 31st, 1922, and that day, as it turned out, would be the last of her life. After that, several days later, on Tuesday, April 4th, a teacher at the local school began asking questions around the village about the Grubers, because the young Cecilia had been missing from class for 2 days, and the teacher was worried that something may have happened to her. And inquiries with the local postman escalated the teacher's concern. He said that he'd been out to the Gruber farm on 2 consecutive days and found the place locked up and silent. And it was then decided that a posse of townsmen would go out to the farm to ensure that nothing was amiss. Now, this party of people arrived at the Gruber farm around twilight, and on that chilly Tuesday, they found the place eerily silent. After calling out the names of the Grubers and getting absolutely no response, they proceeded to search the farm. And it wasn't long before they discovered the aftermath of nothing short from a horrible massacre. You had Gruber, his wife, his daughter Victoria, and his granddaughter in the barn, and the ground around them was stained by a pool of their own darkened blood. It appeared from the scene that they had been lured one by one into the building and then were hacked to death with a mattock, which is a farm implement that has an axe blade on one side and a pickaxe on the other. The injuries inflicted on these victims were quite horrendous. All of them had suffered massive trauma, with the most severe mutilations perpetrated upon Victoria and her mother. But even more haunting was the condition of young Kazilia's corpse. It appeared that the little girl may have witnessed the murders of her mother and grandparents. It had so terrified her that she had torn out clumps of her hair before she was killed. And her brother Joseph had also died as well. And their new maid, Maria. They were bludgeoned to death and found in their beds. Now, the tiny village of Kaifek lacked the resources to investigate such a complex crime at that time. So a team of detectives was therefore sent from Munich to look into the murders. And they quickly made a series of startling discoveries. It appeared that the killer had not fled the scene after the murders, but had spent the entire weekend at the Gruber farm. And this was noted because the beds that had been slept in and meals were cooked, plus the livestock had actually been fed, and even the family dog had been let out. And neighbors revealed that they had seen smoke coming from the chimney throughout Saturday and Sunday. But what the police could not figure out was why. Why would the murderer hang around and put himself at risk of capture? And they were also perplexed as to the motive. I mean, initially it had been assumed that the murders were the result of a robbery gone wrong. But the killer had taken nothing from the house, not even money and other valuables that were just lying around in plain sight. So why then would someone have chosen to slaughter an entire family in such a horrific fashion? And the clue laid in the very nature of the killings. Murders that are committed with a great deal of overkill, where the injuries inflicted on the victims go far beyond what is required to kill them, is most likely crimes of passion. So it seemed clear that whoever carried out this atrocity must have known the Grubers. And since the greatest level of violence was aimed at Victoria, it could be assumed that she was the prime target of this attack. Now, following that line of reasoning led the police to a man named Lorenz Schlittenbaumer, who was a one-time suitor of Victoria. That made him a logical suspect, but he actually had an alibi for the time of the murders. And he also insisted that he had ended his relationship with Victoria 2 years prior, after he became aware that she was involved in an incestuous relationship with her father. And no amount of probing could get him to retract his story. And eventually the police dropped him as a suspect, and then the case went cold. Now, the more superstitious in Kaifek, meanwhile, were recalling Gruber's fanciful tales about footprints in the snow and mysterious sounds from the attic. And many believe that the Gruber family had been slaughtered by a malevolent supernatural presence. And when the next suspect came to light, it was indeed nothing other than a ghost. And this was the theory behind it. Carl Gabriel, who was Victoria's husband, had been killed in the French trenches in 1914. So questions were raised as to whether he was actually dead, whether he might not have actually survived and returned to exact revenge on his wife and in-laws for their unchristian behavior. But that theory was quickly put to bed when members of Gabriel's old unit were tracked down, and they said he most definitely was killed. They had seen his body themselves torn apart by an artillery shell. And with that, the Munich police were all out of options. So, when the Gruber farmhouse was torn down a year later, it gave up the murder weapon, a crude mattock still encrusted with blood, and that discovery provided no insight or momentum into the investigation. Even so, numerous leads have continued to be pursued over the years, and the latest one was in 1986. The Gruber family massacre remains unsolved to this day and is one of Germany's most mysterious cold cases. Some say that the killer was nothing more than flesh and blood and was a person that was actually known by the Grubers. Others say it might have been a drifter that was a psychopath. But a small majority of people believe that the evidence of no footprints leading back to the forest on that first night proved in fact that this was actually a ghost or poltergeist. Some say it's a malevolent entity, and others say it could be Victoria's husband who just dropped by, saw what happened after he passed away, and managed enough energy to exact revenge on the whole family. But what are your thoughts? Tell me who you think the killer is in the comments below, because I will read them all and I really want to know what you guys think. Was it an average person? Somebody they knew? A malevolent spirit? Or the ghost of Victoria's husband? You let me know. If you enjoyed this, take a moment to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up and share this video. everyone that you know. Everyone that you know. It's the most important part. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.